Hello and welcome to another episode of Adventures in .NET. I'm Shawn Klaber, your host, and with me today we have some new co-hosts to introduce to you. So we've got three brand new co-hosts, but you might recognize them name if you've been listening to our episodes in the past. So let's start out with just a brief introduction and then we'll get into more details. So let's go start with Christian. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Shawn, and hi, dear listeners. Excited to be on board. My name is Christian Wenz. I live in Munich in Germany. I do mostly web stuff and web application security for the latter topic. I've been a guest to Adventures in .NET before. I am a Microsoft MVP since 2004 for, well, I think originally ASP.NET, but now it's just developer technologies. Love doing web applications and work with a lot of companies, and I'm always excited to see what's up in .NET world and what's up in the web world, and I hope to learn a lot of things during the following months.
Yeah,
on
that's great.
Adventures in .NET.
Good. Okay, Adam, you want to go next?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. And I also already mentioned I was a guest once. I'm a software engineer with like 15 years of experience nowadays, done a lot of stuff, back and front and other various technologies, but I was also doing like DevRel work, tons of public speaking, actually also a book writer, wrote one book about .NET platform and the other book about like applied maths. Always learning, always like enjoying debugging stuff, learning everything behind the scenes and going very deep low level. So looking forward to what new I can learn here, and I hope you enjoy me being on this podcast.
Good. All right, Mark, I think you're in a special group. I think you were on the show a couple times.
Yeah, I'm in a special group. It's the special group. That's the one I'm in. Kids, my name is Mark Miller. I've been writing code for about as long as I've been alive, I think, and it's a pretty long time. I think I'm passing 4 decades of code writing, and it's been kind of crazy. I've started with, I remember punching in like for, hexadecimal code for a Z80. And my monitor was a LED display. And I remember, I was in high school at the time, but I was taking college course. It was a college course I was taking, and I remember they called me the whiz kid because I was creating a video game with my LED display, by having the little the parts of the LED display chase the lights around, that sort of thing. I was working on that. And now we're at a point where essentially the robot overlords are ready to say, hi, Mark, go sit in the corner now. We got this, right? So that's how long I've been coding. I work at DevExpress. I am leading the CodeRush team. CodeRush is a developer tool. I've been actually focused and working on developer tools for probably about 30 years, 20 to 30 years I've been focused on that, as well as good design, that sort of thing. So I'm like, I'm fascinated about how do we make the best possible interface, the best possible UI, so that the people that are using this can get what they need to done with the least amount of effort, the least amount of thought, that sort of thing. That process is an obsession for me. And I'm also, like the other hosts, I'm totally here to learn because I accomplish everything using brute force and ignorance. Those are my tactics, and that's how I get everything done. And so I'm here to totally learn from our future guests and the co-hosts as well.
All right, cool. That's kind of funny, Mark, that you mentioned WizKid, because one of my best friends and actually one of my groomsmen in my wedding back in the days, he was a writer on an Apple II hacking magazine, and his column was called WizKid. So nice. That was kind of funny there. So
that's awesome.
I've been doing programming about as long as you. I think I wrote my first program probably 1980, and it was on a TRS-80 computer. And we had black and white televisions as our monitors, and cassette tape drives and things like that. And
Yeah. Yeah, I did all those things too. I was there. I had a TRS-80.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
it. And we're still here, kids.
yeah,
Trying to
yep,
make us leave. You can't do it.
yeah. So I've told the story a few times about the first computer I actually owned was a TRS-80 color computer that had 4K of RAM. So I wrote a Hangman game and I could only fit 25 words in it before it started crashing on me.
Yeah. I wrote Super Blockout, I think is what I called it. It was like Breakout, but it had a square in the middle. And when you move the paddles one way, everything went clockwise. The four paddles went clockwise to the other side. So it was this kind of like really cerebral game that nobody wanted to play. There were balls all over the place, bricks everywhere. And yeah, I remember that same experience thinking it took me about I want to say about 4 months of exploring before I got the really strong sense that what I wanted to do was beyond the capabilities of the machine, right? Just like you're describing as well, that 4K limit, right? Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
we were there. Shawn and I were there, kids. We'll tell you what it was like back in the days of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, and then in high school we finally got some Apple IIs, and so that was all the rage in high school. And then I decided to go on to college, and I really wanted to do desktop programming, but there was no such thing in college courses back then. So when I went to college, they taught, Fortran, Pascal, COBOL, and C, not C++, just C. So that's what I learned there. And it was all on mainframe type computers and things like that. So, I remember after my first year of college, I'm from the Seattle area. So I went and applied to Microsoft. And this was probably 1985, 1986. And so it took me all day to find where Microsoft was at to go in and fill out an application because
you did it. You did it in person.
Well, yeah, that's how you could do it. So, I figured it was, probably a 20-mile drive from where I was at. So I drove up there, and back then you didn't have Google Maps or anything like that. So I used the Yellow Pages. So I just looked up in the Yellow Pages what their address was. And so I went to that address and it says, sorry, we have moved. We are now at da-da-da-da-da-da. So I go to that address and it's, sorry, we have moved. We're now at da-da-da-da-da.
Wow.
And so I finally found them, and it's actually where the current campus is in Redmond now. But back then, I think there was maybe 4 or 5 buildings and lots of trees and things like that. So yeah, it was
nowadays
fun.
it's a whole infrastructure. It's like Disneyland, right?
Well, at least it was good. It was in Seattle area, not in Albuquerque, right? Because I think that's where they started initially.
That is correct, yes. Yeah, but it's crazy. I love the Yellow Pages story you just told, because I've been in comparable situations, right? But nowadays, so we're recording this in 2023, it's unimaginable that these things ever happen because we are so used to having technology at our fingertips.
Right.
And just things like Google Maps, right? Or the other competing piece of software. I so rely on that, right? When traveling somewhere, I don't even plan ahead often because I know, hey, I have a Maps app on my mobile phone, and that will bring me to a target. I will be able to have order a ride via my mobile phone, right? So I don't have to look up the number of whatever the taxi provider or the local taxi company. No, it's just I don't have to prepare because when I'm there, everything will kind of work out. Even public transportation. When we are recording this, I'm 3 days away before actually flying to Redmond or to Seattle and going there. And I booked this on really short notice because scheduling was a bit tricky. But the amount of time I spent on preparing this is minimal, right? And I feel kind of bad because that makes me nervous that, I missed something obvious, or I'm there and I'm lost or something. But no, it just won't happen. I just will, and then, get a ride somehow, and then I'll just be there. And compare this to, I think the first time I personally was in the United States was, I don't know, 25 years ago, maybe, probably even longer, almost 30 years. Back then, I prepared travel books. I don't remember how I booked a hotel. Probably I called somewhere in the middle of the night and booked it. But nowadays, you just go there. It's a luxury in a way, right?
Yeah, it'll get you there, but it might take you on a weird path every once in a while.
Oh,
It's like, why is it taking me this way?
Isn't that the story of the man or the lady who booked a flight to Sydney? And I think they wanted to go to Sydney in Australia, but isn't there also the Sydney written with an I in British Columbia? And so she was wondering why she was flying to the west and not to the east.
I remember when I was in preparatory school and geography class, and we were to provide like geographic coordinates for various cities. One of them was Sydney. So I found Sydney in the US, and my teacher, she was okay only when I was reading those coordinates, but when she realized it's on like the west side, not the east side, that's kind of weird.
I was just looking it up, right, to see whether I was wrong. So actually, there are several Sydneys with I. One in Montana, one in Nebraska. There's one British Columbia. There might be even more, right? So yeah. So this could happen. This could still happen.
It did to me. I booked a ticket to San Jose, California, but it was not San Jose, California. It was not.
But the other San Jose is pretty nice, I've heard. I've never been there, but I mean, Costa Rica, right? So
yeah, it's not bad. Well, it's okay. The other parts of Costa Rica are really nice. San Jose itself is a little bit of a mix. It's got, both.
It does have the airport at least. So I mean,
it does have the airport. Right? I got an airport. I don't know why everybody's upset.
So yeah, Sydney, BC, it's got some great skiing in the area, but I don't think the same can be said for Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, speaking of this, I remember I was at a conference, speaking at a conference in Sydney, and I booked my ticket so I would arrive like within 24 hours of my talk. And they rescheduled my talk without telling me to be 2 days earlier. And something like that. And I remember I'm like getting on the plane and I'm seeing all these notifications coming up saying, "Where's Mark? Mark's not at his talk." And I'm like, what? What's going on? I'm about to fly 13 hours to Australia, and is my talk all done? And and I'm trying to figure out if I should get off the plane or not. And ultimately, we decided that I learned that they had rescheduled me essentially without telling me, I believe, or at least without me receiving that information. And but they said we'll do it for the regular time, but in a different room. And you're good to go. And as I get that, they close the door on the plane, and I'm like going to Australia, whether I like it or not. So yeah, there's still some mix-ups that can happen even with cell phones and stuff like that, right? Communication, email.
What always amuses me with Australia is whenever I go there, like I find that international calls from Australia to the US is for free. But if I want to text someone from the US, I need to pay. I never understand why this way. Like I would expect text to be free and calls to be paid, but it's the opposite when I go there.
That's interesting.
Our younger listeners probably keep asking themselves, okay, what's a text message? Is that, what's that?
Yeah, it's like a native WhatsApp in your mobile phone.
Exactly.
We're using native WhatsApp, kids. Don't give us a trouble. Don't yell at us.
But on the same note, like I'm from Europe originally, and we never used MMS. so multimedia text messages. But when I went to the US, and when I moved there to live, I learned that MMS is quite popular. Even when you go for public events or whatever, you register over that. I always believed in Europe that is that standard. No one ever really considered it seriously, but in the US it's completely the opposite. So native built-in works like a charm.
I think depending on where in Europe you are, I think either sending or receiving MMS might cost a little bit, which may prohibit its use. But yeah, I mean, if you refuse to install a messaging app on your phone, and if you want to send an image or an emoji, then MMS is all you got.
Yeah. And once I was actually trying to implement this, talking a little bit technical, I was super surprised to learn that at least in Android world, there is not standard API in your mobile phone. Send MMS, receive MMS, nothing like this. Every single application we're talking about, like a Google texting application or Signal or whatever, they need to implement that on their own. So this is completely even though it's standard, all devices implement it completely differently and definitely not compatible way.
So a question, when did we all first get into .NET? Have we all been since the 1.0, 1.1 days, or are there some of our, Adam, I'm looking at you, even though our guests can't look at it, you seem younger. So have you been in it for 20 years?
Younger, but still bold, as some of us on this call. My first .NET was actually around time .NET 4, I believe. I mean, I was using .NET 2 as well, but generally it was around 2008, 2009. So .NET 4 was already around. Visual Studio 2010, that was a blast. But that's when I'm talking about that professionally. Personally, before getting to the enterprise and the industry, I was doing some older .NET. I even recall Visual Studio even before it was called Visual Studio, etc., etc. But yeah, professionally started around version 4. But to make it a little more interesting, I think it was 3-4 years ago, I tried to actually install .NET 1.0 on Windows 10 to see whether it still works. And yes, it does. The hardest part to do that was actually to find all the installers, right? All the installation files to get that working, up and running. But once when I went through that, it was working pretty nice. Don't recommend that though, but still a little bit of history.
I mean, if you see how many Windows-based applications are still running on Windows 10 or even 11. Well, 11 is a bit harder, but still, it's the backwards compatibility is quite amazing actually. Yeah, I started early on. As I mentioned, I focused on web technologies, and I did that early on. And so, if you look at the technologies or the server technologies around these days, I think the market leader is PHP, and then on second place is ASP.NET Core. And others follow, which we won't name here, of course. PHP and the predecessor of ASP.NET, ASP, Active Server Pages, they are from the same year, they're from 1996. And I started working with both early on, right? I mean, in the beginnings, they actually were quite similar. But then eventually ASP stopped evolving and PHP ate their lunch. And then I was, because I always want to have one alternative, I always try to use technologies that are mainstream, because then it's easier to build a team, right? It's easier to find help, information, documentation. But I still wanted, to have a look at the top two in the market. When the first beta of .NET came out in, I think 2000, is it 2000? I of course looked at it, and I was super disappointed, right? Also when then .NET 1.0 came out, also when 1.1 came out, because from a web perspective, that was, I don't want to say embarrassing, but it was in an infant stage. I still remember that back in the days, they had this idea that the web framework was kind of deciding what kind of browser the client was using. And there were kind of two types of browsers. I think once was, I don't know if it was the the term they were using, but I think it was something like upscale browser or not. There was only one upscale browser according to ASP.NET. You can all guess which browser that was. And the browsers that had a significant market share and maybe arguably better, they were considered not upscale browsers, so they got like a limited feature set. Things were rendered differently. It was a mess. It was a mess. And I mean, I probably wouldn't be sitting here if they didn't change gears for the 2.0 release of ASP.NET and the .NET Framework, because then they made it cross-browser. And in hindsight, I think that was paramount for the success of the technology. I think that, and when they started providing an MVC framework, which kind of was an initiative of one developer originally, right? And they offered that as well as an alternative to the web forms approach, right? Yeah, and so from then on, so these were my first versions, and the more stable and mature the versions got, the more involved I got. And I'm still very happily using PHP as well, because it's still a great framework, a great language, has evolved also massively during the last 27 years. But still love what ASP.NET Core is offering. Pretty happy with my technology choices from back then, especially if you look at some of the other frameworks that were hip in the late 1990s or in the 2000s. And some of them, they just, ceased to exist or just proved to be a technology that's not future-proof. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, Christian, I didn't mean to say you weren't young. I mean, you're definitely younger than Mark and me. So
who knows? We'll need to talk about that in the next episode or something.
But for future episodes, you're going to have to shave your head.
I'll consider it.
There's some serious asymmetry, Christian.
But I mean, can't we do anything with KI, like a mid journey, like give me Christian with a bald head or something? I mean,
you get one of those skin caps,
caps. Yeah. We'll find something.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember back then ASP and then the .NET. .NET was actually ASP Plus, is what it was.
Yeah. That was the code name, right? Of ASP.NET. Yeah. But I mean, I would rather call it ASP minus, but ex post, you can always easily say something like that, right? But yeah.
You want to go back to writing VB script for your programs?
But as I did a lot of ASP before, I mean, and I have to give credit where credit is due, right? So I loved ASP. And why did I love ASP? Because that was probably, and I have to be honest here, that was probably the last technology that I completely grasped, because it was, I think, 6 objects with 36, if I recall correctly, properties and methods. I knew probably 34 of them, right? So I just knew those things plus the VB script syntax. That's it. Right? Nowadays, I'm so relying on IntelliSense or auto-completion and the documentation. Because I mean, how many classes do we have in .NET now? Is it 5-digit, something like that? How should I even need to know all of this, right? So of course, productivity went up greatly when I compare the ASP.NET Core productivity with the ASP productivity from back in the day. So even the ASP.NET 1.0 productivity. But still, I mean, back in the days, I knew everything about the technology. Nowadays, I know what I'm working on, and I have to research the rest if there's something new. Then that's why, and I think both Adam and Mark stressed that before. We are always learning, right? And that's why I'm always excited about a podcast like this, because there's always new perspectives and new things to learn. Because nowadays it's impossible. Or at least I haven't met a person yet who could actually pull it off to really know everything in and out about a complex framework or technology. And I mean, especially with .NET. There are so many different aspects. So I think there will be plenty of stuff to talk about in the coming months.
So Adam, did you actually build anything with the 1.0 that you got installed, or did it work?
Nothing that I could publicly admit that is running in production. Let's believe that it never happened.
Did you find out that there's no master pages in that 1.0?
I was actually using some ASP Classic also, I think, when I joined my first company. So that was very old dinosaurish stuff, way older than I used to be at the time. So yeah, I was doing some of that, mostly in the maintenance mode though, but still developing some new screens, adding features for the clients. So yes, these things were running. I hope they are not in production anymore, but well, that was banking finance sector. So you never know what's actually running behind the scenes, especially that at that time we were using like IBM mainframes. And one of the interesting thing about IBM mainframes is that they had completely different character encoding. We're all used to Unicode, and they were running EBCDIC. Funny thing about EBCDIC, I come from Poland, and when it comes to currency, which you have typically under digit 4 on your keyboard, and similarly in EBCDIC, there was like one character thingy that was representing Polish currency. However, this character we were migrating stuff from IBM ZOS mainframe to, let's say, decent Windows-based .NET thing. Hope these things do not work anymore. They were migrated to something decent nowadays.
I mean, isn't it alive? Someone tells you, okay, this is just a prototype. We'll eventually replace it by something serious. For me, that's always a warning sign that I have to be super diligent with the technologies and approaches I'm using, because that thing will potentially be around for a decade, right? If they, of course, say, yeah, we do it the right way, and we have to use best of breed and the latest stuff, then unfortunately, chances are that this might see the day of light, but not for long.
In this case, you can always take your COBOL code and run it on COBOL.NET.
I was just going to ask you, has anybody written anything in none of the main .NET languages like VB, C#, or F#? So I remember COBOL.NET being, in the early days they were doing that, and I never did it in .NET. I did it in college as a class, but
it's still around. I help an enterprise getting rid of it at the moment, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's still running, but it's just hard to get people experienced with it. And so I think that's the mainstream point I previously made, right? So if you have something that a lot of people are using, then it's maybe easier to find some help. Maybe the only exception or big exception in the .NET space at the moment, at least, please tell me if you disagree, is F#, which I think is pretty amazing. But still, I think if you compare the numbers of C# developers and F# developers, it's a huge gap, and maybe that gap is too huge actually.
Well, speaking about F#, I always miss that actually Scala dropped support for .NET. Like initially, Scala language was supporting both JVM and the CLR. They dropped CLR because, well, they couldn't get higher kind of types to work well, and generics and all the magical features. But still, I remember 10 years ago, I wanted to even implement my custom compiler from Scala to .NET Platform, but then I hit exactly the same wall. It's not that straightforward as is used to look in the tutorial books. But maybe one day Adam Furmanek's compiler will see the world publicly. Not going to happen soon. But anyway, F# is similar case. I mean, personally, that's obviously my personal, or really functional generic programming is what is stopping this language from really getting its prime time.
I keep waiting hoping for Richard Campbell to have his book finally come out so we can kind of learn these inside stories about the early days of .NET and everything along those lines, and I think we had him on the show a couple of years ago when he was writing his book, and it's still not ready. I know I listen to his podcast on a regular basis, and he's still working on it. But
Yeah,
So
I
he's a
spoke to
busy
him a
guy.
while ago, and yeah, I'm still anticipating that. So we should back him again. So Mark, what?
Well,
Yeah.
in the meantime, you can watch his talk on YouTube about history of
Yeah,
.NET.
but
Pretty
still, the book. I
enjoyable.
mean, so many interviews and details. I know how much work has gone into that project. So that I think that will be a great read. But yeah, let's talk about it when it's there. So Mark, what was your first .NET version?
I think it was 2002,
Okay,
and I think it was.
so 1.0
want to.
final.
I think I want to say it's 1.0 is what I think it
One
was.
1.1, yeah, 1.1 for the two, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was in Las Vegas in an apartment that we rented, and we were rotating developers in and out of that apartment because we were porting Code Rush, which had been written for Delphi or Delphi, depending on where you are, over to .NET. And basically, I had sold DevExpress on the idea that we rent an apartment there, and we have devs working there essentially full time, and we also have them working remotely, but they swap in and out of that location. So I'm there full time, and just pushing everybody really hard, and that's how we started building Code Rush. And I remember, comparing Delphi to C Sharp. And I remember writing Anders Heilsberg's name on the whiteboard, and every time I was mad about something that wasn't quite perfect in C Sharp yet, I'd write that underneath his name, and I'd be like, "Here's there's no static virtual functions in C Sharp. Why not? Why not, Anders? What's going on?" And I remember at one point, Dustin Campbell, who was one of those devs, he's actually working for Microsoft now. But he was in there with me, and we'd always kind of joked about, Anders was on my list, and I was going to go get him. And he's listening to a .NET conference live, and Anders is taking questions, and then he hears my voice in the audience asking the question, and Justin's like, "Oh no, Mark's in the same room with Anders. Oh no, he's going to get him." But everything's okay. Anders is all right. No, he's not unharmed, and we're here. But yeah, that was my first experience, right? So pretty much from the beginning, I actually think so. So I've essentially worked with two languages primarily, like lived in two languages, Pascal and C Sharp. And my impression, though, is that the advances that C Sharp, the language itself, has taken in, say, the last 8 years have been really significant, have really changed how you can interact with it, and in ways that I think really help developers. So you can write the same code with fewer characters, for example, right? You can express things in much more simple, easier to read ways of doing that. These are things that were fundamentally changed in the language, right? If you look at how the language starts, when it started, I'm pretty sure there were no generic methods, right? Generic methods came, I want to say, 3 or 4 years into it, I want to say, something like that, right? And so to me, the fact that they are essentially the team seems to be carefully reinventing the language almost, right? Reinventing parts of the language every few years, right? They're really, I feel like that team is led by some of the smartest, most introspective developers that I know. I think they're really, really doing an impressive job on the language. So yeah, as a guy who's sitting in the C# vehicle, I'm loving the new things that are coming in, right? That they keep coming in and the pace that they're coming in at.
Yeah, we had Mads Torgersen on one of our shows, and we talked about the history of C# and where it's going and things like that. So, yeah, the pace has really, really picked up. It's almost hard to keep up with what's being implemented and what's new. And it's like, okay, do I want to use that, or where do I use it, and all that kind of stuff. So, the pace is
Mads
something.
is amazing. That guy is like, I want to say he's one of the most underrated developers there. Nobody knows just how good Mads is, but he's better than everybody thinks. That's kind of where that's my take on Mads. Mads is really brilliant, smart, and quiet about how brilliant and smart he is, right?
So did Code Rush start out as a personal project, or was it a company that you were working for at that time?
No, it was, so I had my own company called Eagle Software, and we created 2 products. One is called the Component Developer Kit, and the other was we called it React, but it was a component testing. They were both focused on creating components, custom UI components for Delphi. And so there were just tools that allowed you to do common things that you do in building components all the time. And then I started looking at this idea and playing with this idea of making it real easy to integrate design patterns with your code, right? So that you would say, I want to use this design pattern, and it would find the parts of your code to kind of hook in. Up to that point, I had not used the editor from Borland. I'd used a third-party editor. But I realized that this design patterns tool that I had envisioned was going to really require that you use the editor from Borland. And I was like, which is now in Barcadero, but I was like, yeah, their editor is not good. It's really problematic. In order to lay the foundation for creating this design patterns implementing tool, I'm going to have to first fix the editor and bring it up to speed. And so Code Rush started as an add-on for Delphi. And it was essentially a personal product to bring Borland's Delphi up to speed so I could write code as fast as I could think. Because I was, up to this point, there'd been this distance between ideas and what my fingers are typing out, right? The ideas would be leading, and I would be desperately trying to catch up with those ideas. So that's how Code Rush started. I never implemented the design patterns tool. I never ultimately implemented it, and it was kind of like a really big idea that was hard to do. But Code Rush, kind of speaks for itself, especially when there's a big discrepancy between the host IDE and what Code Rush can do, right? And in the beginning, that discrepancy was large. Now, as we're moving forward and you're starting to see AI come in and making suggestions inside Visual Studio, there's areas where Visual Studio is actually getting better than Code Rush in some ways. Where I'm like, okay, well, I don't think we're going to touch that feature because, that's going to take, 5 people and a lot of time, and Visual Studio's already got a head start. So they got it, that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's how it started. It was basically, I was writing Code Rush for me and selling it.
So has everybody kind of seen previews of Copilot X? Kind of what you're talking about there, having ChatGPT, right in Visual Studio and being able to, analyze your code and hopefully write all my unit tests for me?
Yeah, I've not seen that. I've seen Copilot, and I've seen, the stuff built in to Visual Studio, but I haven't seen what I would call beyond that next gen. I've always thought that next gen version comes from, well, maybe 2 things. One is more training, right? More training, a broader sense of what's happening. And kind of also, I think, a sense of being able to hook in more contextually with the code around you. That's kind of where I think that's one of the 2 things for next gen. And then the second component of it is kind of I guess what I would describe as a contextual kind of hook, where you say, I'm going to grab some code and hit a key, and based on what I grab, I want you to infer what I want to do. So it's not just contextually seeing, where, I'm hitting enter on a line, going down to an empty line, and basing everything on what the line that comes before. I want to be able to grab something and say, go for it. And that's from my perspective, an open area, an opportunity. I'm expecting the Visual Studio team to figure that out and get there. And I'm not sure if I'm going to want to actually try and race them to get there, on that particular piece. But it is, but from my perspective, that's huge, because you can get greater certainty based on what I select when I say go, with training, than I can just by hitting enter on a line and then you guessing what I want to try and do. Okay. So anyway, that's kind of future of what's coming. But yeah, we actually played with CodeRush this idea of writing test cases for you, and we put some effort in there. No AI effort in it, but we were doing things, and I forget exactly what it was, but it was something to the effect of, while you were debugging, stepping through the code, seeing the values that were coming in to a method, and then saying, I want to build a test case with these values coming into this method right now. And so it would take those values, you would create the test case for you. It wouldn't change the code yet because it can't, because you're debugging, right? And so it would store all that, and then when you stop debugging, it would generate all the methods for you that you had created during the time. And it was kind of okay. It wasn't brilliant, you know what I mean? But it was kind of okay, but it was certainly better. It was better than, having to go do that all yourself. So it's kind of you really, getting a good feature is hard. And a good feature, what I mean by a good feature that is universally providing value. No harm to anyone, universally providing value, easy to use, generally accepted as, yes, this is the right way to do things now. And it didn't exist before, right? An innovative new feature that's hard to do. And this description of what we tried to do with the, building the test cases for you is kind of like it's like a poke into the box of let's poke a stick in the box and see if we can get close to something that's useful. And we kind of do it and we come back and we say, okay, what's going to be useful is something much harder to make than what we tried to do. And so we just kind of left it there. We just kind of said, okay, well, we'll kind of just leave that and we're not going to push too hard in that space. But sometimes, like I just finished creating a feature, and I should say too, by the way, the CodeRush is free. It's not, so I'm not promoting anything right now other than the work, right? But we created a feature for jumping to any point on screen in the fewest keystrokes possible. And essentially you can get anywhere on screen in about 3 or 4 keystrokes. And we looked at this problem so hard that we created, the feature's called jump codes. And what it does, by the way, is you hit a shortcut and it, over every token on screen, it'll put like a 1 or 2 character code, maybe 3 if you have a really tiny font or something like that. But it'll put codes up there. But we looked at keyboard layouts for QWERTY, Dvorak, and Colmac. And when we put the jump codes up, we make it so that the pieces you're likely to hit to go to, for example, the first token on every line, it's only generally only one shortcut away. And that line token, that first one, is, first of all, we're going to use all the keys on the home key first, on the home row first. So you don't have to move your fingers up 1 row or down 1 row to get to it, right? And so we looked really, really hard at that problem, to the point that we said, we're going to need an option that says, what keyboard layout do you have? QWERTY, Dvorak, or Colmac? Because it's so important to us, right? We're in this land of what my wife likes to call diminishing returns, right? Where you work really hard for just the smallest incremental benefit. But the end result on this whole thing is you get a feature that's kind of, you nod your head when you realize how hard the feature is working to make it easier for you to get there. That sort of thing, right? And that's kind of, to me, right, I like that's in contrast to the test case thing, where we had this big idea, we put a stab out there, we tried to do it, and we came back and said, okay, it's going to take a lot more work. And then we can have this maybe little idea, but we put a lot of effort into it. and we come back and we nod our heads and we say, this is it. We've kind of come up with the fastest, most efficient way to move anywhere, in your code that you can see, any place that you can see. So it's not bad. I mean, up until we start using, vision tracking, which is also another thing that I'm playing with in my mind. How do I get there just by looking at it, right? Reliably, accurately to the character, right? When vision gaze tracking software is not that accurate, right? How do you make it more accurate, right? But these kinds of problems I love. I love being in this space where we have a problem and the criteria is fastest, least amount of effort, most efficient. What is the answer to that question? What is optimally the most efficient way to get from point A to point B?
I'm just waiting for the days when we'll be able to plug ChatGPT or Copilot X or whatever into like companies' wiki, Confluence, and whatever knowledge base we have, so that finally all the internal search engines will become obsolete, and I'll just ask the bot, hey, how do I do that? And it will be always up to date with all the documentation, all the code, everything else. That's gonna be amazing.
I love it. That's a great idea.
Yeah, let's build that.
Let's build that.
Yeah, I think for many of the standard tasks, having one of those systems or a similar one can be helpful. I mean, that might always be the legal issue, right? So is the code that was generated based on the previous knowledge of the system, is that somehow licensed? But yeah, just the test case thing. I love the test case or the unit test creation example, right? Because if there's probably one thing in development where the number is lower than it should be, at least in many projects I look at, it's the amount of unit tests. And, depending on the system, it's sometimes trivial, but sometimes really hard to write them. But if kind of that burden is done by some software, maybe even in interactive way, such as Mark laid it out, that is just helpful.
That could be like
so for that I'm excited.
That could be like a modern rubber duck kind of thingy that we would be doing TDD with ChatGPT on the side. I mean, ChatGPT generates like next unit test. Obviously, you run the code, it's red, and then you follow RGR, you implement the business code on your own, and then ChatGPT follows with another test for you.
Doesn't necessarily even need to be ChatGPT. We could have something that's specific for coding.
Code GPT.
Right?
Code GPT.
Guys, I just realized we're going to make $1 million with this idea. Yeah. We can't let the show get out. We can't publish the show.
Exactly. So you see, tune in every week, right? That's it's $1 million to be made.
$1 million idea every show.
Every show.
I've always dreamt of a tool where I could just point it at my class. It would detect the interface, and it would try every possible combination of inputs into it and try to break it for me. And then I would say, okay, it's okay. I got this response from your class. Is that a correct response or not? And if it's not, then you either fix it or tell it that, yeah, that's a correct response. So why do I have to write all these different combinations of unit tests if it could just detect it for me, try every character combination, code combination, null, links, all that kind of stuff, and just try to break it. And if it breaks, then I need to either fix it or tell it that, hey, that's what it's supposed to be doing.
I like that. That's super interesting, because one of the things that I've found sometimes in doing unit tests is I'll find a bug after I've built unit tests and I've built a feature, and I go back to the unit test and I'll realize, oh, I forgot about looking at this particular edge case value to pass in. It's kind of a fundamental idea, right? If I'm going to expecting numbers, what happens when I pass a -1 in? Right? If I'm expecting positive ends. And if I forget to write a test case in that handles that, right, then sometimes that can turn into a bug later on. And I kind of like this idea of this, artificial intelligence entity going in, looking at existing unit test cases and saying, oh, hey, here's a flag situation where you're passing in 1, 2, and 3, but you're not passing in, max int or whatever, max value or -1. You're not passing in these kinds of things. Do you want me to create those test cases for you? Here they are. Just click add, and I'll just add them for you if you want.
Yeah, because I mean, I know developers, they're writing unit tests just to get unit tests to pass what the known cases are. They're not writing unit tests really, so spending the time to get unit tests for those edge cases or things that might be happen that they're not expecting.
Yeah. No, it's hard to do, right? Unit tests are often hard to do, right? Sometimes to facilitate making unit tests, you have to create a more decoupled architecture, or an architecture that allows maybe access in ways that weren't intended, so I can go validate internal state, for example, right? So unit tests often require more thought, I think, to the architecture. However, I think your architecture is much more solid at the end of that. It's much more likely you're much more likely to release consistent, high quality updates again and again if you have a solid foundation, right? So it's kind of essential. But the problem is that, I feel like there's two things that planning teams don't allocate enough time for, and one of them is unit tests, and the second one is discoverability. It's just something that I feel like we always now have pressure to answer these questions in a limited amount of time. Write these tests, implement discoverability in some way, and we're under pressure. And as a result, I think both of these kind of don't get as much love as needed to create a really high quality product.
I concur. Well, I think we've gone for a good amount of time, and I think people have really got to know the new hosts, and I hope they're going to enjoy the shows that we've got planned for the future, and they'll tune in. So I think we should start wrapping up. All right, so we'll move on to picks. I'll go first so that Christian doesn't steal my pick. And
Yeah, so actually we have to explain it. So Shawn and I were talking prior to recording today's episode, and we kind of hinted at each other what our picks were, and it could be that it's the same. So please, Shawn, you can go first.
Okay, so my pick is going to be the Night Agent.
Ah,
I knew it was going to be that because it's so good. It was so good,
I had a hard time getting used to the male main character because he's well, I don't want to spoil that much, and yeah, I don't want to steal that from you. So yeah, but
Well, no, I
after
mean
I've
it's a dual pick.
to endure him, I enjoyed the show.
Yeah. So
lot.
just kind of a little bit of background. It's kind of a low-level FBI agent that sits at a desk in the bottom of the warehouse and answers the phone in case anything is going to happen. This is all in little previews and teasers for the show, so not giving anything away. And then, one day the phone rings and he picks it up, and then the adventure starts. It kind of reminds me a lot of kind of a Reacher type style of show, those types of things. So, yeah, but we got into it one day, and we don't typically binge watch shows, but we binge watched all these shows in 2 days, and my wife and I, and we both liked it, so we just couldn't stop watching. We wanted to find out what happened. So
It was a good. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mark. All good.
I was just going to ask, it's one season? You got one season to binge?
one season,
Okay.
yep, and they've already renewed it for season 2 because it's so popular.
Yeah, and I think it's is it 8 episodes? So it's really. So it's not an investment, like in the earlier days when you heard, oh, that's a great new show. Okay, 5 seasons. Every season has 24 to 26 episodes, which is just an investment I can't make, right? But yeah, it's 8 episodes. Each episode, I think it's 8. Was it 10?
It's
No,
10.
I thought it's
10.
Is it 10? Is it 10? Okay, then I'm mistaken. Sorry for that. But it's every episode is 45 to 60 minutes. Most of them rather 45. So really, it's
Yeah.
an investment that is is doable. But yeah, there will be a second season. So yeah, it was great to watch. And I think it's already in the Netflix top. I think Netflix has the distribution rights worldwide, and I think it's already in the top 10 for English language shows. So highly successful. Yeah, so my pick, I would have had that pick, but I have actually a second pick. A thing I started doing a few days ago. Actually, I started rewatching the first 3 Indiana Jones movies because the trailer for Indiana Jones 5 came out, and it was less cringeworthy than I expected it to be. So I think it could be a real solid movie. I love the first 3, and a while ago I was rewatching From Dusk Till Dawn, and when I watched From Dusk Till Dawn when it came out, I thought, oh, that's an awesome movie, and Salma Hayek is in there. But apart from that, also great movie. And I was rewatching it, and I wouldn't say unbearable, but it didn't age really well. The Indiana Jones movies, they aged really well. I mean, I think the first 2 ones they were all from the 1980s, right? 1981, I think, was the first one, and then 84, and then 89 was the third one.
Yeah, so for the first
they
3, they
aged
were all
really
80s, yeah.
well. They are still great movies. I
Yeah.
have specific thoughts about the 4th one, but let's just skip that one. But
I can't say that I watched the second one as much I do 1 and 3.
yeah, the third one I think is the best one, because of the riddle, and it always makes me want to go to Petra and see where the climax takes place, right? Yeah, but they aged really, really well. And I mean, did you hear that? I think, so the movie you liked the least of the first 3, the Temple of Doom, wasn't that the movie where Ki Kwan was playing Shorty, and he now won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor this year? So
Yeah,
like 40 years later.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
Yep. He was also a Goonie.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which is
so my pick would be rewatch Indiana Jones, so that you have all the backgrounds and understand, all of the cameos and whatever they plan for Indiana Jones 5, which I think has a worldwide release end of June 2023.
Okay. All right, Adam, what kind of pick do you have for us?
I'll have something technical, not binge watching, whatever. So you probably all know FFmpeg software. Super cool, can do anything you wish, crop, convert, re-encode, speed things up, slow them down. But do you know how to use parameters? You can always ask ChatGPT. But if you want to do it like in a nice UI way, there is a thing which is called, it comes from Pazera software, which is called Free Audio Video Pack. It is like kinda a set of very thin UIs on top of FFmpeg that allows you, to pick your settings, encoding, etc. And under the hood, it just calls as a FFmpeg with all the parameters you have. You can also see the command line, so it allows you to quickly convert whatever you need, however you need, etc. I use it pretty often with like OBS. So whenever I record a video with OBS to FOV extension or format, then I can easily convert it with this thingy, merge with whatever else, etc. So I recommend that. Works for me. Hopefully it will work for you as well.
All right, Mark, what's your pick?
Well, my pick's going to be hard for you kids to get to, I think. But I'll tell you, the best thing I've seen in probably the last 2 weeks was Hamilton in London at the West End. It was Victoria Palace is where they're playing. It was there were probably at least 6 actors in there that each one of them could have held their own as a lead in their own play. They could have done it. They were outstanding actors, incredible voices. I've seen Hamilton and heard the soundtrack. I've heard the soundtrack and seen Hamilton on Disney, the recorded version of it, many times, but seeing it in person, there was a higher level of comprehension, understanding what was happening, a deeper appreciation for the choreography, especially using the spinning circle in the middle. Really well done. It was the best thing I've seen. We recently, I think it was just last weekend, we were over Easter weekend, we were in London, and we'd seen 4 different shows. Hamilton stood out far and above all the other shows that were there. It was so good, so good. If you have a chance to see it live, I strongly recommend seeing it. Also, the lead, I think he was better than Lin-Manuel Miranda in a number of ways. Lin-Manuel was great because he wrote it himself and he kind of owned it, but this lead that they had in London was incredible. Really well done.
Plus in London, I think it's easier to get tickets, right? So I think on
Yes.
Broadway, it's still really tough, or you have dynamic pricing and can pay up to 4-digit.
Yikes! Yeah, that was not the situation in London.
Yeah.
In London, we bought our tickets, I think, about at least a month and a half in advance. So it was not. And when I tried to get in, we had tried to get tickets to Hamilton in New York City. And that just wasn't happening they were like a year away or something. That's how crazy it was. But it's really well done. I appreciated it. My brain was lighting up because the lyrics are coming so fast. Really, really loving what they were doing there. Yeah.
I just saw yesterday that the Phantom of the Opera is ending after 30 some odd years.
Wow.
So one of the longest running ones that they had. So, but it's
Yeah,
coming
my wife wants to take me to that. She wants me to go to that. I'm just like, that seems so boring to me. They're singing so slowly. I need a rap, Karen. I need a rap. That's what I tell her. But, I don't know. Hopefully she's not going to be all like hearing what you just said, Shawn. And she's going to be like, they're closing. We got to go, Mark. Like, oh, God.
Yeah. So I don't know when the last show is, but it's I doubt you probably get tickets at the box office anymore. You probably have to get them off the scalpers.
Okay, well, that's a relief then. I guess we can't go.
All right. Thanks, guys. If our listeners have questions, they want to reach out to the show, give us feedback, have suggestions of shows, things like that, they can reach me on Twitter. I am at .NET Superhero. Stay tuned, guys. And we'll catch everybody else on the next episode of Adventures in .NET.